this is how you can notice it for yourself, guys. If you are in patterns and you keep repeating the same pattern, you keep going out with the same person, you keep marrying the same person, and you just, it's a repeating pattern. Well, the common denominator is you, right? Yes, all those people were, they had their own issues, but you are the common denominator. So you have to look at, what does it mean about me that I'm in these situations? And this is usually where that negative belief I'm worthless comes out from. And then through this healing, suddenly behavior changes organically. It's like flicking on a light switch and suddenly you're different, because you're no longer operating under this shadow of I'm not good enough. You're now operating under this belief system that I am good enough. In fact, I'm uniquely amazing. Everybody's amazing, and I'm uniquely amazing. For the individual, obviously 100%, this is an awful experience, because you're in it, you're in the weeds. It, like, you feel like you're drowning. It's a terrible experience for the individual in the moment. But what happens after you heal that is you now transcend to this whole new level of being. And then you look back at this happens every single time with my clients. They look back at those experiences, and you know what, there was incredible lessons that they learned out of them. So it's almost like, if we can zoom out, this is why I look at this really soulful, deep level. If you can zoom out and look at this person's soul line of this lifetime, all the lessons that they've been learning, there's a saying out there, and it's true: life happens for you, not to you. So in your greater perspective of life, you are learning all these fantastic lessons, because then when you do all the healing, then you get to share the lessons that you've learned with the world. Exactly. And this is when you can create, if you're an entrepreneur, you create incredible businesses that actually change the world, that actually bring so much beauty into this world, because you know the pain that people are in, so that you can go so deep into that pain because you know it intimately, and you're not bothered by it anymore. You can then look at it objectively, and you can help people. Or if you're, the CEO, then you are this person that can operate that particular mission at the helm as your best self, without having to worry about negative beliefs like, I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail, they're going to fire me this next quarter. You don't have to worry about that stuff. You just get to be you. And similarly with artists, because I'm moving quite a bit into working more with the creative individuals, like artists and actors and musicians, but you create from this incredible place of love instead of the pain. Okay, so I've got two answers for you on that one. Number one, pretty often it was a TV tray in front of the TV. Everybody's eating in silence, watching the Jays game, because I'm from Ontario originally. And that was the most common dinner table. But then the other dinner table was when we finally did sit together. My dad would sit sort of at the head of the household table position, as kind of classical positioning, and then my mother would be sitting there. It was just me. So I'm only an only child, so oftentimes it was just the three of us. But then because we also came from a small town, very, very small, like 1,500 people, it was pretty easy to have family members come over and sit. So it was pretty often I had my cousin there, Ed, and then I also often would have a friend over. So it was very, very fluid. But conversations were mostly about, stuff. What happened in your day? How was school? What's going on? Nothing really too deep, emotionally speaking.
Interesting. So how do you, and we'll get into explaining what it is that you do in a second, but I'm curious to see, what was it that really spawned the interest, I guess, in learning about these deeper ideas, or these deeper uh, healing concepts that you practice today, um, when did you start developing that interest? And was there some type of a catalyst that happened that made you want to be able to get into that position?
Yeah, now that it's so, there's so many layers really. It really started with my own pain, my own existential pain. I say pretty often that I grew up in a family household that had all this stuff. I had the car, I had the house, I had the clothes, I had the food. So we weren't really worried about money, but what I didn't have was emotional guidance. Nobody sat down and talked to me about emotions, how to have them. And something that's also, kind of interesting was I grew up wanting to be a musician because I just loved Metallica. It was like my favorite band when I was growing up. And but I got often, you have to be a lawyer, you have to be a doctor. That was my two options. And so there was always this internal struggle for me. And on top of that, without having the emotional guidance from my family and my parents, I was bullied all the time in school. I was overweight, and I was called short, fat with glasses. That was my nickname. And so I sort of always had I was like being prodded, if you will. And literally I was stabbed quite a few times with a pencil and a ruler when I was little, by the same guy. But it really, I didn't even know that psychology existed until I was maybe 16 years old, 17 years old. And, I stumbled upon my mom's, she was in psychology at her undergrad, Freud's Interpretation of Dreams book. And I just didn't think much of it. And then, but I was carrying this intense pain all the time about my existence. It was just like I had all the stuff, but I was unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't do what I wanted to do. I couldn't run very fast, so I couldn't play sports very well. I was picked last all the time in school for sports games. I didn't really feel like I belonged anywhere. I was just this overweight, fat kid, and I felt truly worthless. And so I was in so much psychic pain. I would look at myself in the mirror growing up, and I would beat myself up quite literally, leaving bruises and scratches all over my body. And it was just, I hated myself. And then from that place, I developed different kinds of addictions. It became very early on with video games, TV, food, pop, stuff like that, pornography when I found it. And then I went off into university at my undergrad, and I literally drank the first year away in my program. And I needed to do that though, and smoked a lot of pot and stuff. And so my addictions ended up becoming alcohol and drugs and sex. And I still had those burning desires though. I actually lost all the weight. I got in great shape, and I got, lots of dating and relationships. I got kind of that thing fixed for myself, but I became the cool kid. I had all the parties at my place, but I still was unhappy. And so I just couldn't figure out, why am I so unhappy? Why does life suck for me? And I stumbled my way into existentialism and started asking those deeper questions about what's my purpose, thinking about my death in the future or now, because you never know. And I started really thinking about why am I here? What am I going to do? Like, there's got to be a reason for me. And I started falling in love with Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning, and the different greats of the existential world. And that was sort of the back door into psychology. It was really about, it was selfish. It was me. I had to figure out me, and you ask a lot of psychotherapists, that's usually the answer too. We're screwed up people. So I say that tongue in cheek, of course. We all need help in different ways. But it was really about me needing help for me, and then realized that, hey, I think actually everybody needs help. So that's kind of the way that I went into psychotherapy.
Love it. I love it. And can you talk a little bit, explain a little bit about what you do? What is EMDR? Who can it help? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah,
Before we
sure.
get into some of the
Yeah,
other.
for sure. Yeah. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's an accelerated form of neurological processing that takes, years and years off of traditional therapy. And if you can't even really compare it, because traditional talk therapy works mostly in the left side of the brain. So you can develop amazing coping skills and strategies and understand yourself and get growth, self-awareness, which is all really important things. And then you can still suffer though. Like I had a psychotherapist for years and years and years and years. And immediately after our sessions, I go straight to the bar.
Mm-hmm.
So so EMDR works on both sides of the brain, and it eliminates the root causes for our current symptoms. And that could be held in neurological pathways in the brain. It could be held in the body. It could be held in the spiritual sphere if you believe in that. It's a completely all-encompassing approach that looks extremely weird, but it works. And by weird, I mean a therapist is waving their hand back and forth in front of your face, and you're following it, and then suddenly you're not feeling any distress, or tapping on your knees back and forth. So it's accessing both sides of the brain back and forth. It can help just about anybody, really. And the question really to ask is, who can't EMDR help, right? And there's almost really nobody. It's that all encompassing that it's a one size fits all approach for people, but everybody's unique, and so it's going to look different for everybody. And then how each therapist works, there's a standard sort of EMDR protocol, but each therapist comes with their own unique approach to therapy. And so it's a huge topic, but classically EMDR was developed for war veterans from Vietnam. And then it was just adapted to work with anybody. So it can work with children, it can work with, couples, it can work with families, we can help anybody. I've worked with CEOs, celebrities, professional athletes, to people that were in poverty, also in school, to students. So it's hard to put it into a box, but it's extremely powerful. It's extremely effective. And it's changed so many people's lives, and myself included.
Yeah. So can you paint a picture of what this looks like? You mentioned there's waving in front of your face, so there's tapping on the knees. So obviously, when I think of going and getting some type of psychological care, I'm laying on the couch and being asked questions. So that's what comes to my mind. What does this look like? Paint the picture of what this process looks like.
Yeah. So that's the classical psychoanalytical approach, where the client would be laying on I usually call the patient in that format, and then the psychiatrist is sitting kind of behind them and eating a Whopper. I'm just kidding. No. But so you could be laying. I do work sometimes with people laying down. That's for kind of different reasons. But prototypically, the client would be sitting up, and the therapist is just in front of the client, but just off to the side. And classically, the client would be following my hand back and forth. And it looks really silly, but it has an incredible relaxing effect on the brain. And so it lets go of what it is that you're struggling with. And it can be done by tapping as well. And these days, there's a lot more things going on online. So these days you could just follow a ball back and forth in front of the screen and just watch it with your eyes back and forth. And lo and behold, before you know it, you're feeling much better.
So is there like any type of questioning or correspondence back and forth between the therapist and the patient at
Good
that point?
question.
So you're like drawing this ball or this tension out or whatever it is that you're trying to extract?
Good question. Yeah. So the therapist is trained to go deep, and again, this is where therapists kind of differ a little bit. It depends on, quite honestly, how much inner work, how much spiritual development, or how much personal development has the therapist done themselves to be able to ask those deeper questions. But you're going to be asked simple questions to identify the root belief system that let's say, we were talking about a bit before we went on domestic violence. So imagine, that you're in a domestic violence situation, and if you're the survivor of this situation, you might be asked, what does it mean about you to be yelled at like that? And then the therapist will identify that negative belief the person has, and maybe it's I deserve it, or I'm worthless, and so that's why I'm here. I'm lucky to have this. Like, these are all things that clients have said to me, and that elicits a feeling inside the person, and there's going to be shame, probably their emotions, like anger, maybe rage or sadness or something like that. And then there's a distress level attached to that belief system. And this is only one little target. So we'll do like, the last time your partner yelled at you. And so you'll imagine that sort of scene, all of those questions I just asked, and then also, what do you want to believe about yourself instead, which would be something like, I am worth it. I am good enough. I'm worthy of love regardless. And it's going to feel at this point not really true. Your head wants to believe it, like, oh, I've got 20 good friends that I see on a regular basis, so I know that I'm worth it. But on the heart level, I don't actually feel it. So then that's the bulk of the questioning. It's just to set up the scene, the target, so that we can kind of work now. What then happens is the weird looking, what's called bilateral stimulation. And then the client will just be led by themselves organically to just let the mind go wherever it needs to go. Then the therapist will check in after about 25 seconds or so, depending on what specific type of EMDR processing that they're doing. And at that point, the therapist asks, so what do you notice now, or what's coming up for you now? And the client just says very basic information. And this is the cool part that a lot of people love about EMDR, not just that it has amazing results, but we also call it secret therapy. So it's like past the secret therapy, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So we say this because the therapist only really has to know, are you feeling better, worse, or the same? It's a positive, negative, neutral. And because what the goal is to not allow or not really promote the left brain as much, because the right side of the brain is where all the trauma is stored.
Okay.
Right? So we do very little talking, and we just kind of, the main thing that we're noticing, the main thing that stands out to the client, and then we just say, okay, go with that. And we allow the client's brain to just make all the connections that it needs to in order to heal. And this is one of the most amazing parts about the human brain to me, is that it's literally designed to heal just like any other part of your body. You break your leg, it's designed to heal. It wants to heal. You have to set it properly with the right position, of course, but it's going to heal on its own. Same thing with EMDR. Your brain wants to heal. So this is very, very, very different than talk therapy, where, you'll You'll talk about that particular scene and like what happened there. Tell me what happened next. And then what does that remind you of anything in the past? And then kind of continuing to question the client. And in that way, you have no idea really where those questions are going to lead that person. And this is unfortunately the case when you're working with trauma specifically. You can re-traumatize the person. So that's what I was saying when I was at my therapist, which I love. Like, he's such a great guy, and just so many good things about the relationship. But I would immediately go drink myself into numbness because I was so distressed by what came up in session. So I wasn't really processing anything.
Yeah, interesting. So do you find that, you mentioned a few minutes ago about how take a domestic violence type situation, and the person, I guess, I don't know if this is the right way to be able to say this, but they basically bring it upon themselves, more or less. Do you find that someone who, I guess, is in this situation is attracted to those types of situations because of some past trauma or some past things that they've experienced, that, you know, they would unknowingly walk into those types of situations? Is that common, or is that?
Oh, such a deep question.
Yeah.
Good question, man. To answer that question, let me pause here because I don't want to say the wrong thing. When somebody gets involved in a domestic violence type relationship, they are missing some key red flags about this relationship, right? And with those, the blindness that the person has with those red flags is often because of earlier life experiences where they thought that, you know, this type of behavior was acceptable for them. So taking that domestic violence type scene scenario, if you're called, you know, you worthless piece of blank, if a person puts up with that, they're allowing that behavior to continue. Now, I like to, you know, I've got so much love for people in these situations because they need to understand that this is not your fault, because you grew up with circumstances and you had certain life experiences that led you to believe that this was true, that you are in fact worthless and you do not deserve something better. So you put up with this crap for so long, and then eventually, hopefully, there's some kind of an awakening moment, which actually happened to me. I was a survivor of domestic violence, and I had a wake-up call with my partner, and it caused me to really think about, this is not how I want to live the rest of my life. I actually don't deserve this. This is not okay. And then that started the ball rolling for my particular healing around my worth. But to go even deeper on that, you know, where are the origins of that person's path that leads them into this domestic violent type relationship? Number one, it goes back to the parents. It's always the parents, guys. It's always the parents. It's a cliche, man, but it's so true. Your parents had belief systems passed down to them from their parents and their parents' parents and so on, and ways of behaving in the world. And I do truly believe that in most cases, parents try to do a little bit better than their parents. I think it's a natural evolution, but doesn't mean that that child, you, gets a great life because, you know, okay, so I didn't sexually abuse my children. I just yelled at them every single day. Well, okay, that's an improvement, but it's still not great, right? So there's still trauma that happens from for that person. And I'm also now doing work which is going even deeper. And so this is where some listeners are going to go, wow, that's cool. And some are going to go, what? This is ridiculous, hokey pokey stuff. But I believe in multiple lives, that we've had multiple experiences prior to this life, and our particular soul has to learn lessons in order to grow in empathy for others and for yourself. And so then your soul may put people in these situations so that they learn a lesson. And
yeah. Interesting.
It's a little bit, you're not going to really find that in very many psychology books. But I mean, you think about the word psychology was the study of the soul. So that's where the origins of that came from. Eventually, through what my clients get after working with me, which is very rapid results, we're talking days, 3 days is sort of the average for me. That person in the domestic violence situation is going to come to the belief that actually I am worth it. Okay. Just thinking about a recent client of mine who was in serious. This is how you can notice it for yourself, guys. If you are in patterns and you keep repeating the same pattern, you keep going out with the same person, you keep marrying the same person, and it's a repeating pattern. Well, the common denominator is you, right? Yes, all those people were, they had their own issues, but you are the common denominator. So you have to look at, what does it mean about me that I'm in these situations? And this is usually where that negative belief I'm worthless comes out from. And then through this healing, suddenly behavior changes organically. It's like flicking on a light switch and suddenly you're different, because you're no longer operating under this shadow of I'm not good enough. You're now operating under this belief system that I am good enough. In fact, I'm uniquely amazing. Everybody's amazing, and I'm uniquely amazing. And that's such a powerful place to go. So that's kind of, does that kind of answer the question in a long-winded way?
It does. And I think I also just want to mention too, and get clarification on this. Obviously I went to a more of a negative type situation, a negative problem, but I can imagine that there could be perceived positives, from an external person looking at somebody else. But maybe that person is, the patient, is very anxious or has a lot of anxiety about something that they've done or keep repeating, keep doing. So I imagine it's probably very similar situations, even more on a, I don't want to call it a positive, because it is obviously bothering the person, but it doesn't necessarily have to be such a a negative situation either.
Yeah, and this is something that's really important, Matt. Is that for the individual, obviously 100%, this is an awful experience. Because you're in it, you're in the weeds. It, like, you feel like you're drowning. It's a terrible experience for the individual in the moment. But what happens after you heal that is you now transcend to this whole new level of being. And then you look back at this happens every single time with my clients. They look back at those experiences, and you know what, there was incredible lessons that they learned out of them. So it's almost like, if we can zoom out, this is why I look at this really soulful, deep level. If you can zoom out and look at this person's soul line of this lifetime, all the lessons that they've been learning, there's this saying out there, and it's true: life happens for you, not to you. So in your greater perspective of life, you are learning all these fantastic lessons, because then when you do all the healing, then you get to share the lessons that you've learned with the world. Exactly. And this is when you can create, if you're an entrepreneur, you create incredible businesses that actually change the world, that actually bring so much beauty into this world, because the pain that people are in, so that you can go so deep into that pain because you know it intimately, and you're not bothered by it anymore. You can then look at it objectively, and you can help people. Or if you're, the CEO, then you are this person that can operate that particular mission at the helm as your best self without having to worry about negative beliefs like I'm not good enough, I'm going to fail, they're going to fire me this next quarter. You don't have to worry about that stuff. You just get to be you. And similarly with artists, because I'm moving quite a bit into working more with the creative individuals like artists and actors and musicians, but you create from this incredible place of love instead of the pain. I'm
Interesting.
a sucker for a good sad song,
Yeah.
just like anybody else. But when I see an artist, Jim Carrey's a great example of this, is somebody that started as one thing and then grows into this other incredible, transcendent type person that now has a spiritual message to share to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I look at. All pain that we experience is an opportunity for us to grow our spiritual mission.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I really, this is so fascinating, and I can think of, so many different avenues to be able to take this. Can you maybe give some other advice and tips on what to look for? You mentioned a few minutes ago about, the repeating cycles and all of that. Is there any other tips that you can put out there that people might be able to identify with, that say, hey, you know what, maybe I am suffering from something here? Is there anything you can add there?
Yeah, and I don't know if you can do this on with the show notes, but I can share a PDF
Mm-hmm.
of the
Absolutely.
different negative beliefs, and this is not exhaustive, but I think there's probably like 50 or 60 of them on there. But if anybody is experiencing any kind of distress, right, and if you break your leg, that's a very physical distress. Like that's not what I'm talking about. But if you see these patterns repeating, like boss keeps yelling at you, or you keep yelling at your kids, or you keep waiting to come home later and later and later, or you're drinking too much on the weekends. There's all different types. Anything that's happening to you, look at this sheet and take a look at all these negative beliefs, and this is the thing, you have to actually trust yourself and allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable with yourself here, because the easiest thing that the brain can do is to just push it away. I'm not looking at that.
Yeah, that's not
But
me.
this is that there's a problem now. That I'm feeling pain and you want to change. Look at this PDF and look at all the different negative beliefs, and any of them that particularly light you up. And I mean that, like, you feel it somewhere in the body, or
Mm-hmm.
oh, that one's important. That's important. Circle that and put that on a sheet for you to take to an EMDR therapist. And that's going to help you tremendously, because all of the pain that we keep repeating, the patterns, they're held within neurological sequences in the brain. And when you think about, let's say the word like I'm bad, that's the belief that keeps coming up. Your brain doesn't just think about that one experience that you just had on Tuesday that made you feel bad, that you were bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's attached to an entire lifetime of different experiences that made you also feel bad. And they may be very, very different. It doesn't have to be, you doing something malicious to somebody else. It could be a parent calling you bad. It could be a teacher, marking an F on your assignment and then making you speak in front of the class and then humiliating you. There's so many different things, but take a look at that PDF, notice which ones you're feeling, and that's a really good first step for you to kind of acknowledge, okay, here's my problem area.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like fixing anything. You got to know what the problem areas are before you can fix it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And so can EMDR be done remotely, or is it more of a in-person type treatment?
Yeah, so I used to believe that in person was the only way to do this, but I've also been doing EMDR online for years, actually, to this point, and I'm really it's the depth that the therapist can take you in, right? Because the the container for which the therapeutic process occurs, it doesn't have to be person in person just a few feet away. Like it can happen over large distances. There is something, of course, a little bit special about being able to, reach out and touch your therapist in an appropriate way, right? But but there is still an incredible amount of transformation that can happen by looking at only this much of you, your head, shoulders up to your head, and that's enough. So distance should not be a deterrent to the treatment.
Interesting. And if someone wanted to seek out an EMDR practitioner, is there anything that you can suggest that they should look for, or tips on finding a good one?
Yeah, totally. I actually have a book called You Need Therapy, tongue in cheek, because I think everybody needs therapy. But it is, the book serves a couple purposes. It's to give people an overall view of trauma and what's actually happening in the brain, and what's going on when you're seeing those patterns. And it also, at the back of the book, I provide some tips for finding an EMDR therapist. The best and easiest way to do that is to go on to the EMDR International Association's website, which is emdria.org. I'm sure you'll have that in the show notes for people too. That'd be great. Yep. There you just type in your location and bam, you're going to get therapists that are on the registry. There's a couple of different ones as well. There's, if you're in Canada like I am, emdrcanada.org. There's a European denomination, not denomination isn't the right word, designation or organization, let's just call it that. And then there's also EMDR 2.0, which is actually what I do, which is a little bit slightly different than the standard EMDR, which we probably don't have time to get into at this point. But there's so much work that can be done from any of these people. If you just go on to EMDR International Association, emdria.org, you're going to be able to see a therapist. And there's a couple of different levels of therapist training, which is also important to look for. You've got a basic trained therapist, which means that they've gone through the initial training of EMDR. They know how to do some basic stuff with EMDR, which is better than nothing. We all start that way. And then you'll see certified EMDR therapist, approved EMDR consultant, and so on and so forth. You see more and more, sort of accolades at the end of their name.
Got it. Excellent. And if someone wanted to reach out and get in contact with you, what would you suggest the best way to be able to do that would be?
Yeah, I would love that. I welcome all, just shoot me a message. We can talk a little bit, and you can go right to my website, grigorecounseling.com, and that's with 2 L's because I'm in Canada. And that's the easiest way. I'm also on Instagram as Grigore Counseling, Facebook Grigore Counseling, and Twitter Info Grigore, and LinkedIn is just my name.
Yeah, fantastic. This is really, really interesting. Like I said, I mean, this is something that I'm absolutely fascinated in, and we could go on forever and ever, talking about different topics here. So perhaps eventually we can have you back on the show again, and we can dive in deeper into some specific things. So I think that'd be a lot of fun. That. Yeah, no, this is great. This is really, really interesting. Thank you, Robert.
My pleasure. And it's just been a great time chatting with you, and also for the listeners too, that like I might be in your ears right now in headphones, or I'm in your car, or wherever you listen. So I just appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking the time. And if you made it this far in the episode, it means you're actually interested in healing yourself, right? So thank you so much.
We all should be.
The courage, right? This takes some courage, and you're gonna love yourself so much for making the choice if you choose to do this type of work.
I love it. No, this is fantastic. Thank you.